Have you ever felt like God went silent right when you needed to hear his voice the most? Like the heavens were locked and your prayers couldn't break through? If so, know that you're far from alone. There's a biblical story that captures this with almost painful intensity: the journey of Job, a righteous, devoted man, full of faith, who lost absolutely everything without a clear explanation. Yet, he declared, "Though he slay me, yet will I hope in him." Job 13:15. That's not poetry. It's a bold choice to keep trusting, even when nothing makes sense. This video isn't just another shallow message about keeping faith during suffering. Here, we'll uncover deep truths that are rarely spoken. You'll realize that God's silence isn't abandonment, that lament is also a form of prayer, and that there are hidden revelations in pain, but only for those who choose to persevere. So if something in this message is already stirring your heart, subscribe to the channel now and hit the bell. This isn't just about watching content. It's about walking together through the storm, like Job. And maybe, in the end, you too will say, "Now my eyes have seen you." Job 42:5. Job lived in a time before the law of Moses. During the patriarchal era, when faith was expressed through direct trust in God and daily faithfulness without temples, priests, or formal rituals, he was a man from the East, wealthy, upright, and respected. His life was perfectly in order until everything was suddenly taken from him. Children, health, wealth. Yet his response was a shocking cry: "Though he slay me, yet will I hope in him." That shows a kind of relationship that goes beyond logic. The biblical story of Job Dosan and number 39 begin with tragedy, but with admiration. God himself calls him just, upright, and God-fearing, a rare title. And still, he suffers. That already breaks every easy idea that suffering means divine abandonment. The fate of Job lived by had no visible guarantees, no established religion as we know it today. He didn't know the end of his own story, yet he kept seeking. That kind of raw, resilient faith reveals more about God than 1,000 sermons. In Job's day, wealth was seen as a sign of God's blessing, and loss was seen as punishment, which makes everything feel even more unfair to human eyes. Being faithful in good times was expected, but keeping up prayer and hope when everything falls apart, that's rare, especially in a culture where honor and social status shaped everything. Job lost all of that, and still didn't lose his trust in God. He chose to keep going. What's impressive about Job isn't just his patience, but his persistence in turning to God. He poured out his heart, spoke honestly, complained, but never went silent, bare his Creator. His faith was bruised but alive. Even without understanding their essence, he continued in prayer. And in that context, prayer wasn't about beautiful words. It was a daily decision not to abandon his relationship with God, even in Thedark, according to the thinking of the time where justice was retributive, meaning do good damned, you'll get good jobs. Situation was absurd. How could an upright man suffer like that? Even his friends couldn't accept it. But Job refused to believe in shallow answers. He didn't want neat explanations. He wanted to find God, even in the middle of his pain. And that pursuit, more than any speech, is what sustained his journey. Imagine someone losing everything. In a society where a man's value was measured by wealth and descendants, Job didn't just lose his children, he lost his honor, reputation, and health. And yet he didn't tear up the Bible figuratively speaking, nor did he abandon his spirituality. He kept seeking in the way he could, through questions, laments, and silence. His perseverance became, in fact, one of the greatest testimonies of faith ever recorded. Instead of falling silent, Job chose to keep speaking to God, sometimes in cries, sometimes in protest. But he never cut off communication. Something priceless, remaining in God's presence doesn't depend on the absence of pain. Decision not to walk away even while bleeding. His biblical story is, above all, about someone who refused to give up his relationship with the Father. Job's journey shows us that seeking God isn't just a religious act, it's a life choice. It is deciding to keep moving even when everything around you stops. And that movement doesn't have to be big. It can be one verse a day, a whispered prayer, a moment off reflection. Because it's precisely in that place of silence and persistence that something begins to shift. God's silence carries a weight that few are willing to admit. It feels like the absence of an answer is a locked door within the soul. But the Bible shows us that silence is an absence. It's a different kind of presence. Job experienced this deeply, said, "I do not see him, but he knows the way I take." That changes everything. God doesn't need to make noise to be present. It's a common mistake to think that if God isn't speaking, he's gone. But the biblical story is full of moments when heaven was silent and still. God was working. Think of Joseph in prison, Moses in the desert, or Jesus before Pilate. None of them heard a clear voice at the time, but it wasn't abandonment, it was preparation. Silence is often the pause before the miracle. True faith is walking without a map. It's knowing the path has a guide, even when you can see him. Job had no logical explanation for everything he was suffering. But he knew, God knows my way. When everything around you is dark, that certainty becomes your only lamp. And this light doesn't shout, it whispers to the heart that still believes. It's easy to trust when there are visible signs. The real challenge is to keep praying when the only answer is an echo. But that's when spiritual maturity begins to grow. Many biblical characters faced this test. Hannah, crying for a child. Elijah running from Jezebel. Paul, imprisoned in Rome. All of them learned to interpret the silence as training, not rejection. Sometimes, God doesn't respond because he's already given you something more valuable than an answer, his presence. And that has to be enough. There are lessons that can only be understood when the noise of the soul quiets down. When everything outside goes silent, what remains is what's inside. And if there's still a flicker of hope inside you, that's more than enough to go on. Silence also reveals who seeks God for his gifts and who seeks him for relationship. Job had everything and lost it all, yet he kept going. That proves his faith wasn't based on blessings, but on conviction. He couldn't see God, but he knew he was there. That kind of faith doesn't just change circumstances, it changes character. If God feels distant, maybe he's simply teaching you to walk by conviction, not emotion. Like a father who lets go of his child's hand for a few steps, just to show that child he already has balance. Perceived absence is often a sign of trust. God knew Job wouldn't give up. Maybe he sees in you the same strength he saw in him. When God's silence feels unbearable. Remember, even heaven was silent when Jesus is on the cross. But after the silence came the resurrection. That's how the Bible operates. Not with easy endings, but with deep transformation. And this silence, no matter how cruel it feels, is about to reveal something far more powerful. Lamenting isn't weakness. In fact, it's one of the most honest expressions of someone who still has faith. Job didn't try to hide his pain or cover it with pretty words. He was raw, direct, and real. "Why was I even born?" cried out in despair. And the most incredible part? God didn't rebuke him for it. The Bible records his cry as part of worship. It's strange how we've come to think that strength means holding back tears. But the Bible story shows something different. Real strength is the courage to bare your soul before God. The psalms, for example, are filled with laments. David said, "My tears have been my food." That's not drama. That's unfiltered. Devotion, you don't need to fake faith when you're bleeding inside. Job is one of the greatest examples of that. He never lost his connection with God, even when everything else fell apart. His prayers were drenched in pain, but they were still. Prayers and that sincerity kept the bridge open between him and heaven. Pain that's hidden becomes sickness in the soul, but pain that's poured out before God can become healing. Think of Hannah, a biblical character who prayed silently. People thought she was drunk. She cried, sobbed, groaned, and God heard her. Sometimes the very cry you're trying to hide is what God is waiting for. Many are breaking down inside because they're afraid of looking weak. But vulnerability isn't a sign of defeat. It's the beginning of restoration. You can start by talking to God like you're writing an unfiltered letter. God, I'm tired. Father, I can't take this anymore. That's prayer. It's not a formula, it's surrender. Job did this, and God never walked away. The Bible doesn't show us pain-free heroes. It shows men and women who learn to turn their pain into conversation. Jeremiah wrote Lamentations, an entire book of sorrow. Elijah asked to die. Even Jesus wept in Gethsemane. Pain, when brought to God, doesn't drive you away from Him. It draws you closer. Lament is the beginning of healing. When Job said, I have no peace or rest, he wasn't blaspheming. He was being human. And God honors human honesty far more than religious performance. True FITH is still talking to God even when you don't have pretty words. A broken heart eyes an altar where God loves to dwell. You don't need to clean up the mess to be accepted by God. On the contrary, it's in themes that His compassion shows up the most. Job didn't sugarcoat anything. He lamented. He cried. 8. And it was through that raw pain that something deeper began to open up. Something he couldn't yet see, but was already unfolding. When everything falls apart, someone always shows up with a ready-made explanation. God is teaching you something. It's a lack of faith. You must visit. That's exactly what happened to Job. His well-meaning friends came as comforters, but he told them, miserable comforters are you all. The Bible shows that sometimes the worst advice comes from those who think they understand everything. The biblical story of Job is a bold rejection of simplistic theology. He was righteous, blameless, and God-fearing, and yet he suffered deeply. His friends Treadtoe applies spiritual formulas to a pain that was far beyond human logic. But God doesn't work through mathematical contracts. He works through mystery. Through purposest, it's often only become clear after the storm has passed. Easy explanations don't soothe the heart. They only distract it. They create the illusion of control when, in truth, suffering is often unmapped territory. And in that space, what sustains is not cliches, but real faith, the kind that trusts in God's character, even when nothing makes sense. Job didn't need answers. He needed presence. Have you noticed how some prayers sound more like diagnoses than true intercession, as if someone's pain could be fixed with an out-of-context verse? But Jesus wept with those who wept. He didn't offer instant explanations. And maybe that's what's most lacking when we face God's silence. People willing to stay. It's not just explain. The Bible is full of characters who endured pain without knowing why. Jesse was betrayed by his brothers. Ruth lost everything and ended up in a foreign land. Paul was beaten and imprisoned over and over. None of them received explanations ahead of time. They simply trusted. And that's what makes their faith admirable. It wasn't trational. It was relational in hard times. The wisest thing isn't to try to interpret what God is doing, but to trust what God is. That doesn't mean you can't seek understanding. It means recognizing that some things only heaven fully comprehends. As Isaiah says, God's thoughts are higher than ours. Job tried to understand, but later realized he just needed to rest. Wanting answers is natural. It's the human mind. Seeks meaning. But too many wise can imprison more than free. When you, in number 39, re at the bottom, what heals most iasin, in number 39? T, a reason it's a hug. The biblical story shows that God is a father who doesn't just speak, he embraces. And sometimes the greatest miracle is to keep believing without understanding. Job heard a lot that only worsened his pain, but he had the courage to say, you're not elbing. That too is faith, to stand wisely against what's wrong, even while hurting. And it was there, among so many human voices, that he started to hear a different voice. Something from above, not from earthly logic. God's revelation doesn't always come through the roar of thunder. Sometimes it's born in silence, the kind that stings, presses, and makes you question everything. That's what happened with Job. He moved from hearing about God to seeing him with his own eyes. Silence was the womb where this transformation began. The Bible shows that not all answers are spoken, some are felt. pain has a way of changing how we listen. At first, we want explanations. But after pressing and pressing, the soul starts to quiet down. And in that quiet, something new happens. Awareness. Job didn't just receive a theological insight. He had a live experience. Before, he knew God by theory. Now, by intimacy. That's more than faith, that's relationship. The biblical story is full of moments where silence became fertile ground for something greater. Moses spent 40 silent years in the desert before hearing God in the burning bush. Elijah didn't hear God in the wind or the earthquake, but in the whisper. Jesus, before starting his ministry, spent 40 days in the silence of the wilderness. Silence is uncomfortable, but it prepares. In that place, no audience, no easy answers, no applause. The soul matures. Silence clears us of haste. It forces us to stop chasing miracles and start seeking presence. Prayer becomes less about requests and more about exposing the heart. Job wasn't just healed, he was transformed. And that transformation began when everything outside went quiet. It's possible that what you most want to hear God is actually teaching you to perceive. Because there are things he doesn't speak with words, but with time, with details, with the process. Job's deep revelation didn't come in chaos, but after. He learned to see in the silence. The Bible never treats silence as abandonment, but as invitation. What's most striking is that when God finally speaks to Job, he doesn't answer the questions. He reveals who he is. It teaches us something precious. More important than knowing the reason for pain is knowing who is with us in it. Biblical characters like David, Habakkuk, and Jeremiah all received deep revelations after long seasons of silence. So God's silence isn't disinterest, it's intentional. He doesn't just want to relieve our pain, he wants to grow us. Through it, Job ends by saying, "Now my eyes see you." It's not about physical vision, but spiritual perception. He saw something of God that his friend's theology could never have taught, and it all began in silence. Maybe the silence you're facing right now is the perfect setting for your next revelation. Don't run from it. Walk through it, because like Job, you too might come out of this valley, not just with answers, but with your spiritual eyes, wide open to something that is only just beginning to unfold. Job ended his journey with a powerful statement. "I know that you can do all things. No purpose of yours can be thwarted." He didn't say that at the beginning. It came after tears, silence, and pain. This shows that trust isn't the absence of suffering, but the bold choice to believe even without understanding. The Bible doesn't promise explanations, but it guarantees a God who knows exactly what he's doing. You won't always get the answers you're searching for, and that's okay. The biblical story shows that God rarely gives the why before revealing the what for. What matters most isn't understanding the plan, but trusting the author. Job didn't get a sneak peek of the ending, but he walked into a revelation, a restoration, a whole new view of life. It's normal to feel like everything is out of control. But here's the thing. It's out of your control, not his. God is. Still God, even when the scenery around you is collapsing. Job's faith was forged in fire, not comfort. And that's the kind of faith that survives the storm, not because everything is fine, but because it knows the one who reigns is still on the throne. Prayer in times like these isn't about changing God, it's about changing you. It's raw, persistent, sometimes messy conversations with God that your heart begins tolling with heaven. And when that alignment happens, the chaos may still be there, but it shrinks before the peace that takes over. Job prayed for his friends at the end, his suffering, showing that even wounded, he still chose love. How many times have you tried to fix everything on your own, only to realize some battles aren't yours to win? Some struggles are invitations to surrender, not to control. Biblical characters like Abraham, Joseph, and Esther trusted the plan without seeing the end. And when it finally came, the plan was bigger than they could have imagined. When everything lacks explanation, maybe that's the moment to stop seeking control and start seeking presence. God isn't a formula, he's a father. When you recognize that everything changes. The faith you need doesn't come from logic, it comes from trust. Job reached a place where he didn't need answers anymore. He just wanted to be with God. And if you haven't yet given your life to Jesus, this is your moment. Don't wait until you have all the answers. Don't wait to feel strong or ready. Jesus isn't inviting you to religion. He's inviting you into a relationship. It's in the chaos, in the pain, in the confusion that he reaches out and says, "Come." Right now, you can simply pray, "Jesus, I give you my life." He hears you, because in the end, Job didn't finish with answers, he finished with a revelation. Revelation of who God is and who he was before him. And maybe everything you and number 39 are facing right now is the beginning of that same revelation. A story still unfolding, and that can begin today with your surrender. Now that you've made it this far, let me ask you something honest. What are you going to do with everything you just heard? Will you keep trying to carry this pain on your own? Or will you do what Job did? Open your heart before God without being afraid to admit you're tired. The truth is, there's no braver step than admitting you need help. And if something deep inside you is being stirred right now, don't ignore it. Jesus has his arms open for you. He's not waiting for you to have it all together or to figure everything out. He just wants your yes, a genuine yes. Even if you don't know what tomorrow looks like. If you haven't made that decision yet, pray right now. Jesus, I give you my life. Start today. And if this message spoke to your soul, subscribe to the channel now, turn on notifications, and send this video to someone who needs it too. You're not alone here. We're walking this journey side by side.